movies, memes, internet jokes. That's often how the enigmatic country North Korea appears in the media. However, we often forget that North Korea's perceived ridiculousness comes from real and terrible roots. Brazen aggression, political oppression, and cruel treatment towards real suffering people. How did it come to be like this? And what can be done?
For centuries, the peninsula of Korea was home to numerous kingdoms, largely sheltered from the rest of the world. These societies had a rich culture and inventions that nearby nations would come to envy, such as Goryeo-Celadon pottery and metal movable type. However, in the 19th century, the small peninsula fell under the influence of its powerful neighbors, China and Japan. During the First Sino-Japanese War in the late 1800s, Japan's rapid modernization and militarization allowed it to take Korea from Chinese influence, and Japan fought off Russia a decade later to keep control. During the brutal occupation, Japan limited rights and freedoms, harshly suppressed resistance, and attempted to eliminate Korean culture. Japan's empire, including its control of Korea, finally fell with its defeat in World War II at the hands of the United States and the Soviet Union. The victors divided the Korean peninsula along the 38th parallel, with the northern zone occupied by the Communist Soviet Union and the southern zone occupied by the United States. This fateful decision would haunt the region and the world from that point on.
The Soviet Union quickly installed a communist government, modeled after its own, in the northern zone. Communist leader Kim Il-sung was elected to lead the Communist Party, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, often called North Korea, was proclaimed in 1948 with Kim as the premier. In the same year, the Republic of Korea to the south was declared. At this point, reunification seemed impossible. This only got worse when North Korea, with the support of the Soviet Union, invaded the South in 1950. South Korea was badly prepared for an attack, and the North advanced far enough to even take Seoul, the South's capital. Subsequently, the UN and the United States intervened, pushing the North Korean forces far into their own territory. China then joined the war on North Korea's side, pushing the fight back to the middle. These two sides reflected the Cold War backdrop of the conflict. North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union and China, against South Korea, the UN, and the US. In 1953, after 2 years of stalemate, an armistice was signed, and Korea remained divided. In fact, the border remained almost exactly where it started. Since then, there has been little talk of reunification, and the two countries went into completely different directions.
In the years after the war, the so-called supreme leader Kim Il-sung focused on promoting a personality cult around himself, building up the military and becoming economically self-sufficient. However, the country's economy suffered from the heavy emphasis on defense and declining aid from the Soviet Union and China. Meanwhile, South Korea established a democratic government after several decades of instability and dictatorship, and its drastic economic development earned it the title of being one of the Asian Tiger countries. Kim Il-sung died in 1994 amid economic failures and natural disasters. His son, Kim Jong-il, took his place, continuing and even expanding his father's dictatorial rule. He was succeeded after his death by his son, Kim Jong-un, in 2012, and he continues to maintain dictatorial rule to this day.
While North Korea's government no longer strictly adheres to a communist ideology, it still retains the centralized rule of its early days. The Workers' Party of Korea has been the ruling party since the country was founded. The government adheres to the ideology of Juche, or self-reliance, which is the basis of North Korea's militarism, nationalism, and isolationism. While North Korea does hold elections, candidates must be approved by the WPK, and most of the time, only one candidate appears on ballots. Elections are really only held to keep up the appearance of public assent. Supreme People's Assembly is the legislative body of the government, but it has little real power, only serving to pass decisions already made in higher areas of government. The cabinet, led by a premier, acts as the executive branch and mostly handles economic issues. The supreme leader is the most powerful person in the government, serving as the head of state and the chief commander of the military. Today, this position is held by Kim Jong-un. Even dead leaders have titles. Kim Il-sung is designated the Eternal President, while Kim Jong-il is the Eternal General Secretary. These flashy names reflect a personality cult promoting the ruling family. Kim Il-sung began a policy of issuing propaganda to glorify himself and the country, while cutting access to outside media, so that citizens would have no grounds to criticize the government. In fact, the pompous propaganda compels citizens to almost worship the supreme leader like a god. This presents some intriguing questions. Do North Koreans actually revere their leader, or is it only out of fear? Reunifying Korea or replacing the government is difficult enough, and if those events happen to occur, would North Koreans even be willing to transition to a different government?
North Korea has a disproportionately powerful military for its small size and weak economy. The number of active troops enlisted in the Korean People's Army is only exceeded by India, China, and the US. And counting its reserve and paramilitary forces, North Korea has the largest military in the world. North Korea seems to know this too, and it often threatens much more developed countries. Though it hasn't carried out any of the threats, the country definitely has the force to cause real problems if it chose to. Perhaps the biggest issue with North Korea's military, and the country's biggest issue to the rest of the world, is its possession of nuclear weapons. The nuclear program began in the 1980s with the construction of factories, and while North Korea ratified the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1985, it failed to meet requirements and often interfered with inspections. While the international community made multiple attempts to end North Korea's nuclear program in exchange for providing humanitarian aid, all of these agreements fell apart. North Korea finally withdrew from NPT in 2003. The first nuclear test in 2006 was only a small explosion, but it drew harsh criticism and sanctions from around the world. Further tests in 2009 and 2013 were more successful and were similarly condemned. Although most experts believe that North Korea doesn't have the ability to actually deliver their nuclear weapons with missiles, North Korea has already designed long-range missiles that may even be able to reach North America, not to mention a large part of Asia. All it has to do is minimize its nuclear warheads to fit in a missile, and they are likely not far off.
North Korea's nuclear program, among other issues, has antagonized many other countries, especially its neighbors. Historically, China and North Korea were extremely close. Both had communist regimes, both were diplomatically distant from the rest of the world, and both fought together in the Korean War against the West. Today, China still provides a lot of the trade and humanitarian aid going into North Korea. China has an important strategic interest in staying on good terms with North Korea. China considers the country a buffer against South Korea, which China considers a little too close to the United States. In addition, China fears that the collapse of North Korea would destabilize the region and cause refugees to flood in, and China had previously opposed sanctions and urged the world to go easy on North Korea. However, China joined the rest of the world in criticizing North Korea's recent nuclear tests, even supporting UN sanctions. After all, a North Korea with nuclear weapons is probably the farthest thing from stability. Still, it's unlikely that China will completely turn its back on North Korea. China is one of the few things propping up North Korea, and it can't afford for it to collapse.
On the other hand, Japan's relations with North Korea were strained from the start, for obvious historical reasons, and they remain hostile today. Japan currently conducts no formal diplomacy with North Korea, and though Japan attempted to normalize relations in the 1990s, talks broke down. Any chance of normalization further diminished when, in 2002, the North Korean government admitted to abducting Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s, which it had been denying for years. Only about a dozen victims were recognized, but there could be as many as hundreds. More recently, tensions rose due to North Korean missile tests, which frequently pass through Japanese territory. Japan works with the United States and other countries in denuclearization efforts.
If Japan has historical reasons to dislike North Korea, South Korea is even worse. Although both governments hold reunification as an eventual goal, their differences make that prospect extremely difficult. The two countries are currently separated by the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, a strip of land established after the Korean War. Despite its name, the border is heavily guarded by troops on both sides, and numerous skirmishes and North Korean infiltrations have occurred along the zone. North Korea has also fired on South Korean ships and islands, and all of these confrontations have killed many people. In 2000, South Korean President Kim Dae-jung began the Sunshine Policy to improve relations with North Korea, which included organizing a reunion of separated family members and having athletes from both countries march together at the 2004 Olympics. However, changing leaders and North Korea's escalation of its nuclear program led the policy to be deemed a failure. In 2013, tensions peaked following the third nuclear test. North Korea declared the 1953 armistice over, cut off emergency communication lines with South Korea, and threatened to destroy South Korea with nuclear weapons. Fortunately, no actual fighting occurred.
So what does America have to do with all this? The U.S. is close allies with South Korea, which the U.S. helped to rebuild and modernize. Today, the U.S. and South Korea are strong trade and military partners. In fact, American forces make up a large part of the troops on the southern side of the DMZ. On the other hand, the U.S. has no formal diplomatic relations with North Korea. The U.S. and North Korea had little interaction following the Korean War until North Korea started seriously pursuing a nuclear program. It was actually American intelligence that led to inspections of North Korea's nuclear facilities, and an agreement to help North Korea build power plants in exchange for halting its nuclear program ended up breaking down. Relations further declined with George W. Bush's presidency. He famously named North Korea as a member of an axis of evil and resisted negotiations. The U.S. government also harshly criticized North Korea's nuclear tests and has been at the forefront of sanctions and negotiations to end its nuclear program. As for what North Korea thinks of the U.S., its government has called the U.S. the sworn enemy of the Korean people, and it has threatened to destroy America with its nuclear arsenal. North Korea also uses over-the-top propaganda to ridicule and vilify America. Other issues that strain relations between the two countries include North Korea's imprisonment of American citizens and cyber attacks against American companies. But these are all things that we see in the headlines. What about the things North Korea isn't flaunting, but hiding from the world?
The North Korean government has a website that shows beautiful pictures of Korean culture, Korean art, and Korean history. The website makes it seem like a beautiful place to visit on vacation. However, the truth is shockingly different. North Korea was always reluctant to reveal its true self to the public. The leaders reluctantly accepted the UN's help in dealing with the humanitarian crisis and only acknowledged it after more than half of the 24.9 million people there were almost dying from starvation. At a first glance, the biggest problems are malnutrition, starvation, and a lack of clean water. The UN has spent a lot of money and resources to try to improve the situation, and recently the UN requested $111 million from the US to help combat the humanitarian crisis. However, no matter how much the UN may work to improve the situation, the fundamental problems are extremely hard to fix. These include political turmoil, a lack of resources, and a lack of food security. This also leads to improper health care and the inability to rebuild infrastructure damaged by natural disasters. The UN has made progress in meeting the daily needs of many people, but 16 million people still suffer from a lack of food security, high malnutrition, and economic turmoil. Sanitation systems, heating systems, and clean water are in disrepair, and the lack of technology and supplies makes it practically impossible to meet the basic needs of all the people.
Although there are many problems and there is immense poverty, not everyone in the country lives such a life. There is an unofficial caste system that was set up by Kim Il-sung when the country was first being formed, as a way of keeping his supporters close and others as far as possible. The caste system still exists today and plays a huge role when trying to figure out who marries who goes to college, or who gets a certain job. It is known as songbun, which means ingredient or background. More recently, the caste system has changed, and the government, although reluctant, allowed small independent markets to exist after the humanitarian crisis. This market and other underground businesses have played a major role in giving even the lower classes a chance. However, there is still a major wealth and power gap. The highest caste consists of the supreme leader and his relatives and friends. The next highest caste, which is still powerful and rich, are the bureaucracies and members of the government. Mostly everyone else is part of the lower castes. A member of the lower caste, a miner who ran away to South Korea, states, "Someone from the state was always watching what we were saying, watching what we were doing. The state treated us as if they were doing us a favor simply by allowing us to live." The lowest caste is basically made up of miners, farmers, and other workers. Members of the highest class may get an apartment in Pyongyang, the capital, have electricity, get high-level medical care, have their children easily admitted into college, and get the highest paying jobs. Members of the lowest class, on the other hand, suffer from lack of food, lack of clean water, and a lack of health care. And on top of that, the only way for them to go to college or even move up the social ladder in some way is to use bribes and money that they don't have. Overall, life is pretty miserable in North Korea, but North Korea is extremely reluctant to accept that and reveal its situation to foreigners.
If life for the average North Korean is bad, life in its political prisons is simply nightmarish. About 120,000 people are held in political prison camps. Not only is the offender imprisoned, but also family members from multiple generations. An ex-bodyguard who was put in prison for trying to flee the country describes the experience that he faced in Yodok political prison. If you're a political prisoner, Yodok's main goal is to kill you. The prisoners are not given enough food and are forced to do hard physical labor. If they are unable to finish the labor, they are given even less food as a punishment. It's a cycle of death, and an estimated 40% of prisoners die from malnutrition. Even worse, prisoners are arbitrarily tortured, abused, and executed for the smallest reasons. Interviews and pictures from former prisoners capture the horrific conditions. North Korean leaders deny the existence of such prisons and deny their crimes against humanity as well. The UN issued a report in 2014 documenting the human rights violations and seriously deliberated referring North Korea to the International Criminal Court, but never actually did so. Many people who have successfully run away from North Korea have shared the horrible lifestyle that they faced. While they share such information, they must remain anonymous in order to protect their family members and friends who are still in North Korea from being persecuted. These are all problems that must be considered and taken into account when America is deciding its North Korean policy.
North Korea is clearly a troubling country, both to other nations and to its own people. As one of the most powerful countries in the world, can the United States do anything to end North Korea's current regime? Frank Januzzi of the Council on Foreign Relations offers 3 routes to the U.S. Active destabilization, engagement, and containment. Active destabilization involving military pressure would probably be successful in ending North Korea. The U.S. has a formidable military itself, and if it teamed up with its allies or the UN, it could probably defeat North Korea. However, this option is almost unanimously opposed, even by America's allies. As said before, North Korea's military is no joke, and if the U.S. declared war on North Korea, it's likely that South Korea and Japan would be in danger. Plus, China would strongly oppose any American efforts to spread its hegemony in Asia, and if it chose to join the fight, the Second Korean War would probably destroy North Korea, along with the rest of Eastern Asia, not liberate it. Plus, would North Korean citizens really be happy if some foreigners invaded and dismantled their government? If you wondered why America never just declared war on North Korea, this is why.
The second option, engagement, includes reversing all of our hostility towards North Korea and getting it to improve its relations with the US and South Korea. This would involve relaxing sanctions, sending more humanitarian aid, and encouraging North Korea to become an active, responsible member of the international community. While being nice to North Korea sounds crazy, it's been tried before. President Bill Clinton pursued a similar strategy, and South Korea's Sunshine Policy also reached a handout to North Korea. Ultimately, however, both policies never improved the state of North Korea or its foreign relations, and the 21st century saw North Korea only ramp up its aggression. Engagement rests on the hope that keeping peace will eventually soften up North Korea, but this hope has proved false in the past.
This leaves the third option, containment, which is currently being used. Maintaining North Korea's economic and political isolation with strong sanctions might just provide the environment for its government to fall by itself. Of course, this wouldn't be simple or guaranteed. North Korea probably won't go anywhere as long as China still supports it, and just waiting might only give North Korea more time to develop its nuclear program. Still, President Obama remains confident that it's only a matter of time before North Korea collapses on its own.
North Korea is the most isolated, the most sanctioned, the most cut off nation on earth. Over time, you will see a regime like this collapse.
None of these options are perfect. After all, that's why the problems with North Korea still exist. Still, given how backwards and destitute the country is, it seems almost inevitable that North Korea won't last. In the case that North Korea as we know it does end, the United States and its allies will have a lot of work to do to rebuild it and reunite Korea. Still, as costly as a North Korean collapse would be, this would be in the best interests of all parties. The world will no longer have to deal with the volatile, dangerous regime, and the people of North Korea will finally be free.